Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
We finally got our new license plates and have to ditch the dealer temporary plates. And because we live in the overregulated state of California, we of course have to add a front license plate to the Bronco. And I think Ford's solution for that just flat out stinks. I'm glad I found out what it was before the dealer took delivery of our Bronco. See these dimples? That's where the dealer was supposed to drill into the paint to add their plastic license plate holder. After learning this, I contacted the dealership before they got our Bronco and told them in no uncertain terms that they were not to put this bracket on. And here's the bracket that Ford puts on the front of the Broncos. I still got it from them just in case I could find a way to make use of it. This is what it would look like installed. Aside from drilling holes in the paint, I wasn't crazy about having it mounted so high up like this. Neither was my wife. To be honest though, I personally thought it would look worse than this, but we still don't like it. So I wanted to find another bracket option, and there really aren't any good ones out there. Let me explain before you tell me in the comments that a good bracket solution does exist. Now, if you option the modular steel bumper, this isn't such an issue, as there's quite a few license plate relocation bracket choices out there that will work great. For example, this is the one I like and would have chosen. It's centered low and uses the modular bumper's existing mounting points. And if you have the modular bumper and need this solution, then I'll provide a link in the description below. If you have the regular standard plastic bumper like us, then join me on my license plate bracket discovery trip. It'll be brief. Here's the only bracket I could find that is available in the market now, and that is also meant to work with our standard bumper. At first glance, it looks like a good option, but I don't think it'll work for us. I stared at it for quite a while, and I think the only way I could install it so it didn't interfere with the parking sensors would end up covering up a tow hook, and I have plans for those later. This is where I'd like to install the new plate, and yes, I will still have to drill some holes, but if I needed to cover them up later, that would be easy with some black plastic plugs or fasteners. This type of bracket I found on Amazon can rotate its position. It's meant to be used on a bumper with a winch so it can flip up out of the way. It came with hardware, but I don't want to use it because it's all silver. It all needs to be black. Why? Because it does. I also got this universal license plate holder, which has a ton of mounting points on it, which I figured would give me more ways to adjust the fit. This also came with some screws, but I probably won't use any of these either. Same reason. I also got the set of black hex head screws to replace the other hardware. And finally, I got a cheap set of 2 black metal license plate frames. I'll provide links to everything I ended up using in this video in case you want to recreate what I did here. So, some assembly required. I started by putting the flip-up bracket together. I used screws and nuts from the set I got, along with the nylon spacers that came with it. I used Loctite on all the screws since I don't have locking washers or nuts with nylon inserts to keep everything from getting loose. I then attached the universal license plate holder to the flip-up bracket. After some fiddling with it, I positioned it approximately where I thought it was pretty well centered on the splash shield and marked the holes with an acrylic paint pen. I got out the drill, put in a giant drill bit, and just went to town drilling into the splash shield. No, I'm just kidding. That would obviously be stupid. I'm going to remove the splash shield. There are 6 bolts holding the splash shield on. This one and this one, both on the driver's side. And this one on the passenger side. Then further back on the driver's side you have this one. And over here on the passenger side you have this one. All 6 of these bolts are 50mm in size. You start by loosening the bolts way back here. Don't take them out, just loosen them. The splash shield's holes are open at the back so it can be slid out. An actual good design choice by Ford. Imagine that. Then it's just a simple matter of removing the other 4 bolts. The splash shield can then be lifted off, or maybe I should say slid out. And this is what it looks like underneath with the splash shield removed, in case you're curious. To figure out the exact hole positions, I ran some tape along the splash shield horizontally or parallel to the front of the splash shield. I also ran some pieces vertically, using the lines molded into the shield as reference. This let me measure horizontally and find the exact middle of the shield. I already knew that the distance between the holes on the bracket was exactly 10 inches. So I was able to mark 5 inches from the center in both directions. This showed me how far off my marked circles were. I took an average of how far down vertically both my circles were from my horizontal line, and then marked what should be the true center of the circles. I used an awl to mark the holes. I took my tape off and cleaned the paint circles. Acrylic paint is water soluble, but even with Windex and a stiff brush, this took me more effort than expected. Marking with chalk would have worked better, but I didn't have any. Now, with the correct drill bit size and nothing fragile behind the splash shield, I could drill out the holes. A few things I want to note here. The splash shield is pretty thick plastic, but even so, I want to use some decent sized washers to distribute the force of the screw head. I'm also putting these in backwards from what I want, because I'm not sure if the end of the screw would hit or rub anything in the engine bay. Even though you probably won't see the screw sticking out the bottom, I might reverse these later so it looks cleaner if there's enough clearance. You'll also notice that the bracket has some unusually large holes, so you need some really big washers on them. I ordered a bunch of large black washers, but didn't get them in time for this install, but had the silver ones on hand. So this is another reason to flip the screws over later so I can swap out the washers. Must be all black, remember? To reinstall the splash shield, you just need to slip it back onto the 2 rear bolts washers. If it's difficult, you can loosen them up some more to create a bigger gap to shoot for. I would then insert each bolt by hand and give them enough turns to make sure they're threading in okay. You could then use your choice of tool to tighten them all down. And then don't forget to tighten down the 2 rear bolts. And that's it. This is what it looks like. If you leave the screws a little loose, you can flip the license plate down if that even makes sense. Maybe the frame will rotate instead of bending if someone hits it. I'll probably tighten it up a bit. I used some more of those hex screws to mount the front plate. I'm not showing it for obvious reasons, but you can see it's a typical white California plate. I do have the retro black version on order though. And here's what it looked like compared to Ford Solution. I think this is much better, but what does my wife think? Yeah, that was pretty obvious as she wanted this way in the first place, but you still never know. One more thing, when I went to install the rear plate, I saw this under the dealer temporary plate. Seriously, Ford? Why bother? It's always going to be covered up anyway. Well, that's the end of the great license plate relocation saga. I hope you got something out of this. See you later.